Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Salt-Crusted beef tenderloin. That's right, this video was inspired by a Colombian technique where beef is encased with salt, wrapped in a kitchen towel, and then set over hot coals to cook. And apparently this produces the juiciest, most flavorful beef tenderloin you've ever had. And while that does sound great, I realize that roughly half the married population of the country would not be into burning up a perfectly good kitchen towel. So I decided to try a towelless version of the same technique. And this is that experiment. So let's go ahead and get started with what's basically the adhesive here. And for that, we're going to start with 1 clove of crushed garlic, to which we will add some freshly ground black pepper. And then the key to the whole operation, 1 egg white. And believe it or not, that's it. We'll simply take a whisk and give that a mix. And by the way, I'm using garlic and black pepper here. But as long as you have the egg white, I'm pretty sure you can use any seasonings and spices you want. Okay, don't forget, you're not only chief of your beef, you are also the sir of your loin. So as long as we have that white here, we can play around with the flavorings if we want. But anyway, we will give that a mix, and then we'll grab a brush, because this is now ready to apply to our tenderloin. Speaking of which, there it is. For this, I got a 2-pound center-cut beef tenderloin roast, which as you can see has been fully trimmed. And what we'll do is take our brush and our egg white adhesive and paint that all over. We're talking top, bottom, and the sides. So please make sure you're very thorough and generous, because it's this egg white layer that's going to cause the salt to stick. So we'll go ahead and apply that all over as shown, at which point it's ready to coat in our coarse sea salt, which should look something like this. And by the way, it doesn't have to be sea salt. Okay, where the salt comes from is not as important as it is coarse ground. And what I decided to do is coat my meat in the same baking dish I was going to cook it in. So I started by covering the bottom with about 1/4 inch of the stuff, and we'll place our meat in there and kind of roll it around, coating it with the salt. And of course, we're definitely going to want to coat all those sides, as well as those ends. So basically, I just rolled that around, adding more salt when I thought necessary, making sure it was all nicely pressed in, especially on the top. And above and beyond encasing that beef with salt, I also added a little more around the roast so the bottom of the pan was covered. And I'm not sure exactly why, but it felt right. And then because I was staring at the bush out the back window, I decided to cut a couple rosemary sprigs and add them to the salt. I thought it could subtly scent the meat, but more importantly make our house smell really good. But anyway, as with all things, that's optional. And then what we need to do once our beef has been encrusted with salt is simply let this sit out at room temperature for 30 minutes, which is going to do a few things. It's going to let our meat warm up a little bit. It's also going to give our crust a little time to dry out and set up. Not to mention our tenderloin is being seasoned by what's basically a dry rub. In fact, you'll notice at the end of the 30 minutes, there's a good amount of moisture in the bottom of the pan. But don't worry, what we're losing in liquid, we are gaining in flavor. And at this point, after a half hour on the counter, it is pretty much ready for the oven, but before I pop it in, I'm going to push in this probe thermometer. Okay, this tenderloin is not cheap. So we'll use this, which will sound an alarm when we've reached the perfect temperature. So I slid that in so the tip was right in the center. But unfortunately, the way I did it with that thermometer leaning on the edge of the dish caused the only major mishap with this experiment, as you're just about to see. But anyway, once that's set, we can go ahead and transfer that into the center of a very hot 475-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes or until we have a finished internal temp of about 125, which means we have to set our probe lower than that. Okay, because this is going to keep cooking even after we take it out, I like to set my probe for 116 because that internal temp can climb as much as 10 degrees. So we will set our alarm for 116, at which point we'll pull that out, and if everything's gone according to plan, it should look something like this, except without pieces of your crust cracking and falling apart. You see what happened because of my thermometer placement is the meat contracted, that moved, causing it to raise the crust, which caused those pieces at the bottom to break off, which caused me to say a bad word. But the good news is that's going to be easy to avoid, and yours will look perfect. Hey, that's why I experiment. So even with my cracked, I thought it looked awesome. And then what we need to do before we even think of serving this is let it rest at least 15 minutes, which will give our guests plenty of time to get all their oohs and ahs out. Not to mention, I imagine, a few Instagrams. And then once that has rested, we'll go ahead and crack and remove the crust, which thanks to our egg white will come off very easily. Oh, and by the way, because I was inspired by that Colombian technique, which I believe is called lomo al trapo. But anyway, because they don't sear the meat in that technique, I did not sear mine, which is why that surface is not the most appealing color. So if that bothers you and you're going to carve this tableside, feel free to take an extra minute and brown that surface in a nice hot pan before you slice it. But having said that, if you're going to plate up slices like this, it really doesn't matter. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, a 2-pound roast like this will make enough to feed 4 friends or 6 acquaintances. And yes, I believe this technique will work with even a longer piece of tenderloin. So I went ahead and sliced up my tenderloin, and I could not believe how juicy it was. I mean, come on, look at that. I mean, I was actually thinking it was too much juice. I was thinking maybe it all leaked out, and the meat's going to be really dry and tasteless. But that was not the case. Every bite was dripping with moisture. And above and beyond the incredibly tender and insanely juicy texture, this was by far the most flavorful beef tenderloin I've ever had. It really did remind me of eating a prime rib, which is saying something because beef tenderloin is way, way leaner. But anyway, I went ahead and sliced that up, and I'll serve a couple pieces on a plate so I can enjoy it properly, along with my all-time favorite steak sauce, which would be béarnaise. Oh yeah, don't worry, I'm going to show you how to make that. So I served up some sauce with my beautiful beef, which by the way was so juicy I had to blot some up in between shots. And you might think with all that salt we used in the crust that this might be too salty, but it's not. While I'd have to say it's aggressively seasoned, it's not too much. But anyway, that's it, salt crust beef tenderloin. Notwithstanding that one little thermometer mishap, I really loved how this came out. And we didn't have to burn up any kitchen towels. So I really do hope you give this great technique a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.